Hello friends, welcome to StudyIQ. In this session, we will be learning a new module, inflation. What is inflation? Inflation can be said as a persistent rise in the general level of prices of commodities in an economy. That is, the increase in the average price level in the economy. So, inflation means that with more money, you are now able to buy only fewer commodities or lesser commodities. So, inflation means persistent rise in the prices of commodities in an economy over a long period of time. So, it generally means increase in prices. Inflation can be divided into two types. One is demand pull inflation and the second one is cost push inflation. Demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Demand pull inflation is caused due to an increase in the demand in the market, or an increase in the aggregate demand in the market causes demand pull inflation. The word itself says demand pull. That means there is a pull in the demand. There is an increase in the aggregate demand in the market. And when it comes to cost push inflation, it means that the cost of production in the economy has increased, and due to an increase in the cost of production in the economy, supply has decreased, and this has resulted in increase in the prices in the economy. That is due to a increase in the cost of production. That is cost push inflation. So demand pull means increase in the aggregate demand in the economy, and cost push inflation means increase in the cost of production in the economy. Now let us see each inflation type one by one. First one, demand pull inflation. So demand pull inflation, as we have discussed, is caused due to an increase in the aggregate demand in the economy. Increase in aggregate demand in the economy. So let us see through a graph. Let us take price P in the y-axis and quantity demanded QD in the x-axis. Downward sloping demand curve and upward sloping supply curve. Equilibrium point E. We have already discussed that when there is an increase in aggregate demand in the economy, the demand curve would shift to the right. There will be a rightward shift of the demand curve when there is an increase in the aggregate demand in an economy. So here we can see that the demand curve has shifted to the right, and the new demand curve is DD1, and the new equilibrium point is E1. So at the new equilibrium point, we have new price P1 and new quantity Q1. The old price was P and quantity demanded was Q. So here we will see that there is an increase in price due to an increase in the demand. Also here we will notice that the quantity demanded has increased. So in demand pull inflation, the price increases, also the quantity demanded increases. In fact, the increase in the price is due to the increase in quantity demanded of the commodity. So here the price and the quantity demanded also has increased. So this is demand pull inflation. Now let us see cost push inflation. Let us take price P in the y-axis and quantity demanded QD on the x-axis. Downward sloping demand curve, upward sloping supply curve, equilibrium point E. At equilibrium point E, the price is P and quantity demanded is Q. So here what has happened? Here we will see that there is an increase in cost of production. Cost of production in the economy has increased, and this has resulted in a decrease in the supply. So due to an increase in the cost of production, the supply in the economy has decreased or come down. So due to a decrease in the supply curve has shifted to the left, and decrease in supply has shifted the supply curve to the left. So now the new supply curve is SS1 and new equilibrium point is E1. So at the new equilibrium point, the new price is P1 and the new quantity demanded is Q1. So here we will see that the price has increased from P to P1. Also you should notice here that the quantity demanded has come down from Q to Q1. So here we will observe that the price has increased and the quantity demanded has decreased. So, what is the difference between demand pull inflation and cost push inflation then? In demand pull inflation, we have seen that the price has increased, also the quantity demanded has increased, and in fact we saw that the quantity demanded has increased and that was the reason why the price increased. But on the contrary, in cost push inflation, we see that the quantity demanded has also come down due to an increase in the price of that commodity. Now let us see what are the causes of inflation. First, let us analyze the causes of demand pull inflation. The first reason for demand pull inflation is an increase in the purchasing power of the consumers. Increase in purchasing power of consumers. What does this purchasing power mean? Purchasing power means the consumers now have more money to spend. That is, the money supply in the economy has increased. Money supply increased, so purchasing power of the consumers has increased. More money supply, more money for purchasing. So this leads to demand pull inflation. That is, when consumers have more purchasing power or when there is more money supply in the economy, the aggregate demand in the economy also would increase, and this would result in demand pull inflation in the economy. The second reason for demand pull inflation is deficit financing. What is meant by deficit financing? We have expenditure and revenue. When expenditure is more than the revenue, we have deficit, and in order to meet this deficit, we would borrow. So there would be borrowings. This is known as deficit financing. To meet our deficit, we borrow money, and this is deficit financing. When the deficit financing goes up, there will be more money in the economy for spending. So more the deficit financing means more the expenditure. So more expenditure in the economy means more money is pumped into the economy for purchase of goods and services, and this will lead to an increase in the aggregate demand in the economy, and this will lead to demand pull inflation in the economy. Third reason for demand pull inflation in the economy would be increase in forex in the economy. What is meant by forex? Forex is the foreign reserves that a country has. So how does the forex in the economy increase? Forex in the economy will increase when we have more of exports, when we have more of foreign remittances, etc. So we will learn about forex in detail when we learn about the external sector of the economy. So when forex of an economy increases, it would lead to increase in money supply in the economy, and that will lead to increase in aggregate demand in the economy, and that will finally lead to demand pull inflation in the economy. Next reason for increase in demand pull inflation is decrease in direct taxes. Decrease in direct taxes. So as we all know, taxes are of two types, direct and indirect. So direct taxes are collected directly from the individuals, and indirect taxes are collected from the second person or the third person. So not collected directly. So here we will see how an increase or decrease in the direct taxes will cause demand pull inflation in the economy. So we have a concept called personal disposable income. What is personal disposable income? The total income of a person minus the direct taxes paid by that person will give personal disposable income. That is, the personal disposable income is that amount of money that an individual has for spending for his or her consumption expenditure. So total income minus direct taxes of an individual will give personal disposable income. So personal disposable income, once if increases, it will lead to increase in consumption expenditure of individuals, and if personal disposable income comes down, it will lessen the consumption expenditure of individuals. So here, when indirect taxes comes down in an economy, the personal disposable income will go up. So an increase in personal disposable income will lead to an increase in the spending on consumption expenditure, and this will lead to an increase in aggregate demand in the economy, which will lead to demand pull inflation in the economy. Next reason for demand pull inflation is increase in black money. What is black money? Black money means unaccounted money, the money for which you have not paid taxes. So, if you save taxes on your income or on your profit or on your money, what will happen? It will increase the purchasing power. How? So now you have more money in your hand for spending. So increase in black money in the economy will lead to an increase in aggregate demand in the economy, and this will lead to increase in demand pull inflation in the economy. Next reason for demand pull inflation is an increase in the population in the economy. As population increases in an economy, there will be more people. More people will lead to more demand. More demand will lead to demand pull inflation. Next reason for demand pull inflation is increase in the budgetary deficit. What is meant by budgetary deficit? In budget, we have expenditure as well as revenue. When expenditure increases, it will lead to deficit. So, more of budgetary deficit means more of expenditure. So, when expenditure increases, the deficit in the budget also increases. That means the government is spending more money. Expenditure of the government is increasing. So the expenditure of the government will be definitely on the public. And when government spends more money on the public, it will result in lesser expenditure from the public's pocket. So this will result in more money with the public for spending on their personal consumption expenditures. I'll explain it. So when the expenditure of the government increases, this will lead to lesser expenditure by the public. So that means now the public have more money for their personal use or personal spending. So more money for their personal spending means they have more money for their personal consumption expenditure, and this will lead to increase in the aggregate demand in the economy, and this will lead to demand pull inflation in the economy. Next reason is increase in exports. So when exports increases, there will be lesser commodities available in the domestic market for sale. So lesser commodities in the domestic market for sale means aggregate supply in the market is less than the aggregate demand in the economy. So this will lead to a supply demand gap, and this will lead to demand pull inflation. Next is decrease in imports. Suppose we are dependent on imports for a particular commodity, and on a fine morning the import comes down due to any factor. What will happen? We will have the same demand, but the supply has come down due to a decrease in the imports. So this also will lead to a supply demand gap, and this will pull the demand to a upper side and the supply to a lower side. This will result in demand pull inflation. These are the reasons for demand pull inflation in the economy. Hope it is clear for all of you. Now let us see what are the causes of cost push inflation in the economy. Cost push inflation in the economy. As we have already discussed, cost push inflation means the inflation caused due to an increase in the cost of production in the economy. So the prices in the economy has gone up because there is a shortage of supply. And why is the shortage of supply? It is because the cost of production has gone up. Let us analyze the causes. The first reason for cost push inflation is the increase in the cost of production in the economy. It is the most important cause for cost push inflation. So, cost of production can be divided into factor cost and non-factor cost. Let us see what is factor cost and what is non-factor cost. We have learned the concept of factors of production in the economy in your NCERT classes. So, factors of production in the economy are land, labor, capital and entrepreneur. So, we have to give remuneration to these factors of production. For the land, we have to provide the rent, labor wages, capital interest, and for the entrepreneur, we have to provide the profit. So, any increase in the wages, the rent, the interest or the profit would lead to an increase in the cost of production. So, increase in any of these remunerations to the factors of production will lead to an increase in the cost of production. On the other side, we also have non-factor inputs like the raw materials. So, an increase in the cost of the raw material will also boost up the cost of production. So any increase in the factor or non-factor inputs would lead to an increase in the cost of production in the economy. When cost of production increases, the supply will come down, and once supply comes down, there will be a supply demand gap, and this will lead to cost push inflation. The next reason for an increase in cost push inflation is increase in indirect taxes. An increase in the indirect taxes will increase the price of the commodity. So that will lead to cost push inflation. Next reason is a decrease in the subsidies. We know that the government provides various subsidies to the producers. So when producers receive these subsidies, this will affect the prices. So once government is giving more subsidy means the producers will be able to sell their commodities in the market at lower price. And if the government brings down the subsidies, what will happen to the price of the commodities? The producers will be compelled to increase the prices of the commodities, and once this commodities reaches the market, the prices will be high. So when government reduces the subsidies given to the producers, it will increase the cost of production of the producers, and this will lead to increase in prices of the commodities and will lead to cost push inflation in the economy. Next reason for cost push inflation is hoarding and speculation. Hoarding and speculation happens when the producers or the manufacturers are not willing to bring their commodities into the market for sale. This can be because they are expecting a higher price in the future or for any other reason. So when these producers are not bringing their commodities into the market, there will be a shortage of supply in the market and demand will remain the same. So an increased demand over the supply will increase the prices of the commodities, and this will lead to increase in inflation in the economy, leading to cost push inflation in the economy. In order to tackle the problem of hoarding and speculation, the government has brought many measures, and these measures we will discuss when we learn about agriculture. Next reason for cost push inflation is a reduction in the production or output of the firm. This can be due to many factors like labor dispute, government policies, weather conditions, many factors like that. Next reason for cost push inflation is an increase in the price of imports. We have already said that many of the Indian industries are dependent on imports for their raw materials. So when the import prices increases, what will happen? It will result in an increase in the cost of production. So this will lead to increase in cost of production and then leading to cost push inflation in the economy. Next reason is increase in exports. Increase in exports will result in unavailability or shortage of raw materials or final outputs in the economy. So this will also lead to a supply demand gap and then leading to a cost push inflation in the economy. Next reason is a decrease in imports. When there is a decrease in the imports, there can be chances that these products or the imported goods are used as raw materials, and once the producers feel a shortage of raw materials for their commodities or final output, it will lead to increase in cost of production, and this will lead to cost push inflation in the economy. Next reason for cost push inflation is defective supply chain. This is in fact one of the major reasons for food inflation in our country. Government has taken many measures to tackle this problem, but still we are facing problem with the supply chain and food inflation because we have a very diversified market and most of our farmers are marginal farmers. We will learn about this in detail in the agricultural module, but what is a defective supply chain? We will discuss it here. So defective supply chain means there is no direct connection between the producers and the consumers. It means that there is no direct connection between the producers and the consumers. So when the product reaches the consumer, it will be handed over by many people to reach the final consumer. But food inflation, we have a control over it, but it is a long-term process because the supply chain is defective, because Indian economy or the Indian market is largely informal and the farmers are marginal farmers. So food inflation is one important cause of concern in the Indian economy. Government has already taken so many steps to tackle it, but they are all very long-term measures. In the short term, it's very difficult for the government to control food inflation in the economy. So defective supply chain will increase the price of the commodities in the market, and this will lead to cost push inflation in the economy. Now let us see what are the measures to control inflation in the economy. Broadly, there are three measures to control inflation. One is monetary policy, second one is fiscal policy, and the third one supply management measures. Let us see one by one. The first one, monetary policy. Monetary policy of a country is taken by the central bank of that country or that economy. So in case of India, the monetary policy in India is taken by the Reserve Bank of India or the RBI. So the country's central bank takes the monetary policy. Monetary policy can be broadly divided into two, that is contractionary monetary policy and expansionary monetary policy. Let us see what is contractionary and expansionary monetary policy. Contractionary monetary policy. So contraction, or the word contraction means bringing closer, so making it less. So contractionary monetary policy aims at decreasing the money supply in the economy. That means contractionary policy aims at reducing the money supply in the economy, while the expansionary monetary policy aims at increasing the money supply in the economy. If you remember, we discussed about the demand pull inflation. The first reason was an increase in the money supply in the economy. So you will be knowing that an increase in the money supply in the economy will result in increased rate of inflation in the economy. That is, increased money supply means increased inflation in the economy. So when will the RBI or the Reserve Bank takes contractionary monetary policy? When money supply is more. So when inflation is more, the bank would take contractionary monetary policies in order to bring down the money supply. And when the rate of inflation is very lesser than the minimum, what would the RBI do? The RBI will increase the money supply in the economy in order to bring the inflation level to at least minimum. So, contractionary and expansionary monetary policy. Contractionary monetary policy is taken by the RBI when the rate of inflation is high in the economy, and expansionary monetary policy is taken when the rate of inflation is very less in the economy. So contractionary monetary policy will bring down the money supply in the economy, and expansionary monetary policy will bring up the money supply in the economy. So now let us see what are the tools of this monetary policy. So first one is CRR or cash reserve ratio. Cash reserve ratio means the amount of total deposits commercial bank has to keep with the RBI. That is percentage of total deposit the bank has to keep with the RBI. Let us now see how CRR would affect the money supply in the economy. Suppose the cash reserve ratio is 4% and the total deposit of bank is 100 rupees. So it means that the bank has to keep rupees 4 with the RBI as CRR. And out of this 100, now the bank has only 96 rupees for lending, because 4 rupees the bank has kept with the RBI for CRR. So now the bank has only rupees 96 for lending. Now let us assume that the RBI has increased the cash reserve ratio to rupees 8. Now the bank's total deposit is rupees 100 minus cash reserve ratio will give 92 rupees. So now the bank has only rupees 92 for lending. It means that when the cash reserve ratio increases, it will lead to a decreased money supply in the economy. So an increase in the cash reserve ratio will lead to a decrease in the money supply in the economy. Hope it is clear for you. The second monetary policy tool is SLR or the statutory liquidity ratio. What is statutory liquidity ratio? It is the percentage of total deposits the bank has to keep with itself. So percentage of total deposit bank has to keep with itself. Let us see an example. Suppose the total deposit of the bank is 100 rupees, CRR 4 rupees. 4%. So now bank has 96 rupees for lending. So suppose the SLR is 10%. 10% of the total deposit, that is rupees 10. So now bank has only 86 rupees for lending. This is the first case. In the second case, let us assume that the RBI has increased the SLR. So total deposit is 100, CRR is 4 minus SLR. So SLR now the RBI has increased from 10 to 15. So SLR is 15. That means now the bank has only 81 rupees for lending. Previously it was 86 rupees. So now it is only 81. So what does it mean? It means that an increase in the statutory liquidity ratio will result in a decrease in the money supply in the economy. So the RBI will increase the statutory liquidity ratio when it feels that there is an excess of money supply in the economy, and it will reduce the statutory liquidity ratio when it feels that there is less of money supply in the economy. Next monetary policy tool is the bank rate. Bank rate means the rate at which RBI lends to the commercial banks. Rate at which RBI lends to commercial banks. So let us see it with an example. Suppose the lending rate of RBI was 4%. Now it increased to 8%. So with an increased interest rate, the commercial banks will now borrow less from RBI. And when the interest rate is less, it will borrow more from RBI. So what does it indicate? When bank rate is less, commercial banks will borrow more. So this means increased money supply. The commercial banks will borrow more so that the commercial banks can lend to the public more. So increased money supply. And when RBI increases the bank rate, commercial banks will borrow less. So less borrowing by the commercial bank means less lending by the commercial bank to the public. That means lesser money supply. So when bank rate increases, money supply in the economy decreases. Hope it is clear for you. The fourth monetary policy instrument is repo rate. Repo rate means the rate at which the RBI lends to the commercial banks for a short period. RBI to commercial banks for short period. Repo rates are for shorter period. That is the difference between bank rate and the repo rate. So here also same in the case of bank rate. When the repo rate increases, the banks will borrow less. And when commercial banks borrow less, so there will be less money with the commercial banks for lending to the public. And this will lead to decrease in money supply. When repo rate decreases, the commercial banks will borrow more money. This will lead to increase in money supply in the economy. So an increased repo rate will lead to lesser money supply in the economy, and decreased repo rate will lead to increased money supply in the economy. The fifth monetary policy tool is the reverse repo rate. What is a reverse repo rate? It is a rate at which the commercial banks lend to the RBI. That is, the commercial banks will give to the RBI. So commercial banks will obviously have more trust on the RBI that it would return the money. So when reverse repo rate is high, the commercial banks will give more money to the RBI than giving to the public. So when reverse repo rate is high, commercial banks will give more to RBI. So this will suck out money from the commercial banks which should have been given to the public. Now commercial banks give it to the RBI. So this will reduce the money supply in the economy. And when reverse repo rate is less, the banks will not be willing to give it to the RBI. Instead, it will lend to the public. So it will increase the money supply in the economy. That means an increased reverse repo rate will decrease the money supply, and decreased reverse repo rate will increase the money supply in the economy. These 5 monetary policy tools we will be discussing in detail when we learn monetary policy.